Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about Warbreaker again, but this time I'm going to do an in-depth spoiler review for you. So remember to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and let's begin. So the easiest way to talk about this book and, do full spoilers in my opinion is to just go character by character and detail their story arc. So let's start with who I originally saw as the main character, the star of the show, Siri. So Siri is the youngest daughter of King Dedalin. She's the misbehaving, carefree, free spirit, youngest daughter who basically had no real set purpose in life. Everybody else had, from a goal to do from birth, but she didn't. So she's very nice and, carefree and all this kind of stuff. So as a result, the king, who claims not to play favorites, who clearly has favorites, chose what he saw as expendable daughter over the one who's not expendable, and sent Siri to go marry the god king of Hallandren, who is the ruler of the neighboring nation, who basically has more breaths than any living person. So he's insanely powerful to the level of a god. They consider him a god because the Idrians follow a religion that says any use of breath or awakening is evil. They have this terrible perception of the god king. So Siri is terrified, and Vivena is terrified for her sister, but is also jealous. So that is pretty much how it all starts off. But when Siri actually gets to Hallandren and meets the God King, for a while she doesn't actually even meet him. She's sent there basically as a tool to procreate. So she has to go wait in this room at night naked, and she has to wait for him to take her, I guess. So she's hyper terrified and stuff. But after maybe a week or so, whatever, she realized he's never touched her, he's never done anything. He just comes into the room, basically goes to bed. So he doesn't even really seem to understand why she's there and why she's presenting like that and stuff. So when she actually gets the courage to talk to him, she finds out he's got no tongue and he's only educated to the level of about a 14-year-old, and he's functionally just a figurehead because the city of Hallandren is actually basically ruled by the Council of Gods. So the priest and all those other people will play political games, and then they'll try to manipulate the gods on the council who, make the decisions and stuff, and then their vote will go towards what, they want to happen or whatever. It's completely basically inverted from the way they assumed it was. So all their perceptions about this place is wrong, but in some ways is worse than what they assumed. So after some time, Siri and the God King, Susebron, develop a way to communicate with each other. She teaches him how to write, and they pass notes and stuff back to each other. So they really do start to develop a real relationship and actual affection for each other and stuff. And then they start to basically postulate on the idea of, the fact that he is just a figurehead and he's basically a prisoner in his own palace and stuff. So while they're trying to avoid the obligation of creating a child, they are also trying to come up with a plan to either expose what the priests have done to the God King, or, just basically expose the information so he can actually rule his kingdom and stop this impending war with Idris. But the issue is that Susebron doesn't really believe that his priest would be working against him because, they basically raised him. He's been, in this castle palace pretty much his entire life, never left, and every single need has always been taken care of for him. So, she has to convince him that no, they don't have your best interests at heart and stuff. But there's even more twists in there because Brandon put so many twists and mysteries in this book. And later it's revealed that the Pankal, a third nation in this continent, I think, is actually the ones behind the efforts to start a war between Hallandren and Idris. And they're manipulating the different gods on the council and stuff, trying to get all their command phrases so they can control the giant army of lifeless soldiers, which are basically just zombies. They want to take control of all of them and send them over to Idris and have them destroy it, and then have the Idrians retaliate, so that they basically wipe out both countries so the Pankal can basically take over Hallandren and just, establish their own country and stuff. Susebron and Siri gets captured, and while they're all captured and stuff, they're very dejected. Siri is taken somewhere separate. She's going to be killed and stuff because they don't really need her because they already had a child that was born stillbirth and returned. So they already had somebody to replace the God King, which was the entire shtick, or at least the political machinations of the way the God King power is passed on or whatever. But the actual plan for starting the war, I don't think had much to do with that at all. That was an afterthought, because I think their plan was to just have him killed and everything anyway. While in prison, the God King is basically in a cell right next to one of the other gods from the council, Lightsong. He eventually sacrifices his divine breath to heal the God King and restore his tongue so that he can make use of the insane number of breaths that he has, so that he can use awakening and stuff and just basically go rule and be a powerful badass, which he does. After this point, pretty much up to the point where Siri like starts teaching him, and they get into the questions of how can they deal with this and like who can they trust and all that stuff. She kind of like takes a step back a little bit. Like she, towards like all the end of the book and stuff, Siri rarely has anything to do. She doesn't really do a lot of stuff. She basically plays support to Susebron because she's not an awakener. She's not powerful or, general or anything like that. Their story, while, being connected, it really kind of, in my opinion, Susebron's kind of overlaps hers towards the end. And their entire story feels like an extra add-on to this book, because the real story, I think, takes place with Vivena. Vivena is Siri's older sister. So Vivena actually follows Siri to Hallandren in an attempt to save her from her fate, because she thinks she's just going to be basically a sex slave or, thrown in a dungeon, just used and cast aside or whatever. More or less what she was expecting to happen to herself. And she was completely prepared to deal with this. But, she loves her little sister so much and thinks she's so innocent and all this kind of stuff. She can't possibly deal with this or whatever. But in reality, what it is she feels usurped. She feels like she's been replaced and her life goal and stuff was stolen. So she wants to go and truly, have Siri, go home. And so she can take over that position and, and fulfill what she perceives as her destiny. I love the fact that, cause when, I was originally, reading it, when all this stuff was going down and she was basically outlining this plan, I'm like, man, that's kind of selfish. It feels like you just really just want to do it, that way or whatever. So I was wondering at the time, is Brandon really going to follow through with this? How does that work? How would you even make the switch? How do you even think you can possibly do anything like this stealthily at all? And Brandon, switches it off no, she thinks that's what she wants to do, but it's actually going to be a million other things. So when Vivena actually gets to Hallandren, she meets up with one of her father's contacts named Limix, who has a crap ton of breaths on him, enough to reach the third heightening or something like that. And he's dying when Vivena actually meets him and meets up with him and stuff. And she's she's got all these opinions in her head about the fact that he's holding breaths and it's this, heretical thing to their religion and all that. And basically before he dies and before she can say anything about it, he transfers all those breaths to her. So now she's of a higher heightening and all this stuff. And she feels terrible because she doesn't understand, based on religion, all this stuff, she feels terrible because it's so against the religion and everything. And she kind of hates it, but she's working with these two mercenaries who convinced her that they were working with Limix, who, they were basically working with him to try to stall the war between Idris and Hallandren. So, she basically takes up with them and start working with them. And then they start doing these little things and little guerrilla tactic missions and stuff to disrupt supply chains and all this other kind of stuff. So Vivenna's working with them and doing all this stuff and it's all working good. And you really like these characters, Denth and Tongfa, they're really well written, mercenaries and stuff. It's very clear, their motives are clear. They don't seem to be treacherous or duplicitous or anything like that. They have better mercenary reputations than any other mercenary I've seen in fantasy and stuff. And then Brandon hits you with that twist where they completely betray Vivena, and they have been manipulating her the entire time. So all her efforts to what she think is to stop the war is actually helping to incite the war. So she's been completely manipulated, completely gaslit and everything like that. And so she feels like crap. By the time she barely escapes from them with her life, she's destitute and stuff, and she becomes homeless and lives on the street of Hallandren for a couple months or something like that. For a very long time, enough to basically completely wipe out all of that propriety, all of that, princessishness, to wipe all of that kind of stuff out and like take her down, like to strip her bare, basically. That's what I feel like Brandon wanted to do, like strip her bare, pull all of that stuff off of her so she can be rebuilt back up, because she then meets up with Vasher, who is one of the coolest characters ever. So later when Vivena meets up with Vasher and starts to, like, after she has been destitute and homeless and all this stuff, living on the street, she eventually meets up with Vasher and learns that he's really good at awakening. He knows like a lot about biochromatic breath and stuff for a lot of reasons. So she starts to, you know, basically beg him to teach her and stuff. So she learns a bit more about what she can do with the powers that she has and stuff. And so she starts to work with him because he basically tells her, like, you were manipulated, you screwed up, you're bringing your country closer to war, not, you know, stopping it or anything like that. So she basically begs for his help and stuff, and he helps her to try to go and undo the stuff that she was helping Denth and Tong Fa do. And so, like, that's kind of what they're doing for a bit. And it's like, it's going, you know, I don't feel like they got a whole lot done, but like, it was doing some stuff. And then Vasher is eventually captured by Denth and like tortured and stuff. And Denth was going to kill him. And then Vivena uses her, like, you know, mid-level abilities or whatever. She's learning, you know, more about how to use awakening in the way that Vasher does and stuff. So she uses her budding abilities to break Vasher out. So after Vivena saves Vasher, he he fights Denth, and then like cause he's not as good of a fighter as Denth, but like through a little trickery or whatever, he kills Denth and like eventually get out of that. So later, and during this time, the Pankal people who, you know, started this whole thing, they've gotten the command phrases and they've sent the entire lifeless army towards Idris, and now it's marching towards Idris or whatever. And at this point, Vasher reveals that he's one of the 5 scholars. The 5 scholars is this group of ancient return people who are basically I think some of the earliest Cosmere scholars. They actually are the people on this planet who studied the magic system, and like, cause I think the planet is fairly young. So they're the 5 scholars, the original people who studied the nature of awakening and biochromatic breaths and all that kind of stuff. So he is very old. He's returned, and he's insanely powerful and so freaking knowledgeable. So he gives the command phrase to the God King to control this hidden army that's all throughout the city. So pretty much every statue in the city has a lifeless person in it, and it's encased in stone, so it looks like a statue, but it's basically a rock golem, like ultimate soldier. So Vasher gives the God King the command to control all those, and he sends all of them after the lifeless so he can destroy all of them. Because even though he has the most breaths of any living being, it's still way too many people. Like, he can go and break their commands and, like, you know, basically get them back to a neutral point, but they're so far away from him, and he would have to do that so many times that there is no way that, you know, he could stop them in time before they got to Idris. So this was basically the only other way to do it. And Vasher feels, you know, he's terrified because this army is the army he used, because he was a part of the original mini-war and stuff that, like, caused the fracturing and it caused the political system that exists right now. So he's kind of terrified to use that army, because he used that army in, you know, in stopping the war originally, which was more something he regrets now because it resulted in a bunch of weird stuff like that they didn't want. There's actually still a lot of mystery surrounding Vasher and like the 5 scholars and stuff. Brandon barely goes into it really at all. And like, it's definitely sequel bait and like, you know, further Cosmere stuff. I feel like he left a lot of it out because he wanted to reveal the stuff that they knew in different Cosmere books and stuff, maybe something like that. So he didn't want to just, you know, spiel it all out. So he kind of gave this A plot about the little romance thing. But like, the B plot was the Vivena, you know, becoming a badass warrior and stuff and dealing with Vasher's past while we barely get any of it. Because Vasher was originally a Way of Kings Prime. He was supposed to be in Stormlight. So it kind of makes me feel like Brandon wanted to get some of the stuff about Vasher out, but not necessarily tell his full story yet. So he put Vasher in this other story that was like a dare for him. Cause I think if I'm not mistaken, Brandon was basically dared to make a magic system about something random like color or something like that. And it kind of, you know, cause the way his brain worked, it spun all the way off and became Warbreaker and stuff. So I could be totally wrong. That might be a rumor or something, but that's what I was thinking about when reading it and rereading and listening to it on the audiobook and everything. So, the 5 scholars are the first people on Nalthvis, the name of this planet that Warbreaker takes place on. They're the first investiture / magic scholars or whatever of the world. So they know a crap ton about awakening. Each of the 5 had different specialities and stuff like that. But the 2 main ones that we, care about really are Shashara and Vasher, because they created Nightblood, our favorite character in the Cosmere. Nightblood is the entire categorization system is kind of off. I think he's technically a type 3 biochromatic entity or type 4. I don't know. But he originally was, or it, I guess, I don't know, but the pronouns for Nightblood change. Some people use female pronouns, some use male, some use, non or completely neutral pronouns. So, I mean, he's a sword. It's technically it, whatever. It's a sword. The audiobook voice sounds like a guy, so I tend to go with he. But, so they used, while doing all their research, it brings up so many questions, because to get to the level of power that they were at, they would have had to have collected hundreds of thousands of breaths, I would imagine, just to do the amount of experimenting that they eventually did to figure out all the stuff they did. So it kind of, it intrigues me. I want a prequel book, really, because I want to know, how does that work? Were there people just volunteering their breaths, or did y'all just go and steal them, or were y'all considered gods at the time? Because there's, other names that they were called at the time, Shashara was called Glory Singer and stuff. So maybe, they had the cult of the return. So maybe it was similar to the Council of Gods, where people just, gave them their breaths every week or whatever in order to keep them alive. So maybe it was something like that. And that's how they accumulated so many. But how long was that going on in comparison to what's, going on in present day? That would have had to been a long time, I think. Speaking of the returned and how the returned are worshipped as gods and they have their Council of Gods, the coolest person on the Council of Gods is without a doubt, Lightsong, the Bold. Lightsong is one of the returned. He's the god of bravery and boldness in their culture and stuff. But he doesn't believe in his own religion. He doubts his own divinity, which I think is really cool, because I love characters who question everything. Even if you're in a position of privilege and you like it and, you could just coast and just, live your pampered life and all that, he still questions all of it. He basically calls bullshit. He doesn't feel like he's a god and all this stuff, and he doesn't, so he's just got a bunch of questions, and as a result, he basically tries to be as lazy as possible on his duties and just doesn't take anything seriously, but that results in everybody liking him more because they feel the sincerity of his questions and him actually trying to do stuff. All the gods on the councils get petitions and stuff. People will send them paintings and hope that the god's interpretation of the painting will have some kind of benefit on their life or something like that. And Lightsong is the only one who sees all these petitions, look at all the paintings, read all the poetry people send him and all this stuff. So he's the best of the gods, but he has the least faith in the entire religion and the entire system. But it kind of justifies itself in that later, when he's captured by the Pancall servants after they start killing all the Susebron servants and stuff, he then starts to remember, because his main high priest, who he calls Scoot, I believe, is actually his brother from before, when he died, before he returned. So originally, Lightsong was just the scribe. He was an accountant and stuff, and him and his family, they like to boat and stuff. So he went out on a boating trip with his brother, his sister-in-law, and his niece, and I think probably even a couple more kids. But his niece fell off the boat and was drowning, and he, not knowing how to swim at all, no hesitation, jumped in the water to go and save her, got a rope around her so they could pull her back up on the boat, but he couldn't swim, so he drowned, and he died. So when he died, he heard a voice saying, "Would you like to return?" And they gave him a vision of what I assume is what happens with the whole war thing. And the shard endowment, the god of this planet, gives him the option to return, and he returns. And he starts to remember this while he's imprisoned. So he then basically realizes why he returned, and he realizes his actual purpose, and I guess becomes a believer and sacrifices his divine breath to save the God King so that he can save everybody else. So Lightsong has this great arc. He's like such an awesome character. He's one of my favorite like one-off characters that Brandon's done. Kind of like Rabonio. Like in Rhythm of War, he had this one character, Rabonio, who just shows up for that book and is, a one-book character. And like, she's awesome. And I think Lightsong is awesome. I would love to see him come back, but if he came back, it would cheapen, the gravity of his sacrifice. So I don't expect him to come back. Even when the Pankal were using the other gods on the council and stuff to try to manipulate Lightsong to try to get his command phrases, because, being a god of bravery or whatever, they gave him some command phrases to control their lifeless army. And like, even while all that's going on, he's like, oh, people are paying too much attention to me. Like, I should, be wary of this, or I should try to screw it up, or like, and then like he gets to the point where he can't give away his command phrases and shirk all responsibility, which is, kind of the air he's been putting on. He don't want responsibility or anything like that, but he doesn't give them up, and he eventually gets more like command phrases. So like, even just they're trying to manipulate him through all this political stuff. He's still kind of not having it and kind of sidestepping it, but get dragged into it a little bit and still navigates it. He's a great character. Like, I really can't say enough good stuff about Lightsong. But like I said before, my favorite character is Nightblood. Nightblood is a awakened sword, as I already said, but the best way I can describe Nightblood is an artificial spren, because I think that's precisely what it becomes. So Shashara and Vasher used upwards of 10,000 breaths to awaken a steel sword. And one of the parts about awakening is you have to give the thing that you're giving life a command, and it becomes their entire thing. It becomes their intent, their capital I intent, and it becomes, their entire motivation for existence. So the command given to the sword was destroy evil, which they worked on that command, and they tried to, come up with the perfect command and all this stuff and all this, did all this research and all this work and blah, blah. Because commands, like, we don't know the depth of the detail about how difficult awakening commands are. But there was a command that required more breaths to create a lifeless. And then they discovered there's a one breath command to make lifeless. So there's more to that entire thing. There's got to be an efficiency about it or something like that. But they came upon that as their command for Nightblood, but Nightblood being a sword has no concepts. So Nightblood has no concept of good, has no concept of evil, right or wrong, or anything like that. So it just kind of thinks everything has the potential to be evil. So it just kind of wants to destroy. So it just becomes this like beautiful, destructive, dangerous, insanely powerful blade that has the quirkiest, coolest, fun personality ever. So it's just the most fun little thing ever. Like, the graphic audio. I really recommend the graphic audio book of Warbreaker and of Stormlight, period, because the voice they do for Pattern and Nightblood is perfect. I want to say it's the same voice actor, but I'm not sure. But they sound so completely different. But there's a point where I think most people know Nightblood is a crossover character. So spoilers for Stormlight if you don't know who ends up with him. But when he crossovers into Stormlight and Zeth ends up with him, when the first time at the end of Words of Radiance, when he basically unsheathes him a little bit and hears him speak in his head and says, would you like to destroy some evil today? Anybody who had read Warbreaker at that point knew exactly who that was and was freaking out and all this stuff. In order to keep in his amazing destructive power, his sheath is made of aluminum, which appears to be a Cosmere-wide investiture blocker or some sort, or investiture neutralization or something like that. So Nightblood is awesome. He's one of my favorite creatures, things. Nightblood's one of my favorite things in the Cosmere period. He's so powerful. He's so terrifying. And I can't wait to see what happens next. Pretty much a lot of people are, at this point, just tentatively calling the sequel Nightblood. Like, I want it to be the Twilight Falls. I want a prequel about the Battle of Twilight Falls. And I want just a Nightblood spinoff. Actually, I want the Battle of Twilight Falls because that'll explain all the Nightblood stuff. So yeah, I guess that's all I have for my Warbreaker spoiler review. What are your favorite parts of Warbreaker? Let me know in the comments down below. And remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. And I will talk to you guys next time. Peace.